And to start everything, I'm going to have to call SOMI for speaking. She's going to talk about slavery, struggles and inequality and disparity in Africa and other countries. Okay, everybody put your hands together.
My name is SOMI, and thank you for having us here today. I'm going to talk for a little bit. As a musician, as a jazz musician, and as a storyteller, really as a songwriter. And it sort of talks about how my work is sort of trying to carve out a cultural space of belonging for African students. Are there a lot of Africans here tonight, I'm assuming? Yes? We're all African, we should all be clapping. Right? So this project is actually called Songs of Nowhere for Our Mother's Daughters, Body as Poetry and Transnational African Girlhood. Okay, because I'm originally from Uganda and Rwanda. I see Uganda flag representing, so thank you for that. But I grew up mostly in Illinois, so that's what this project is getting at, is sort of transnationalism and what it is to be an African girl child living in the States and sort of coming into my own as a woman in the States, but also very clearly aware of who I am as an African woman. So I'm just going to read. And this project includes not only a research paper, but a short, very short documentary. Singer-songwriter, the various creative processes of constructing personal narratives and how that narrative is embodied in one's work intrigue me. What motivates one to tell her story? What does that story do? And why is it important to share that story and to listen to others? Throughout cultural paradigms, we construct personal narratives as a mode of representation that can ultimately be situated in the global context. In doing so, we are attempting to express our own modernity within a particular storyline that presupposes a binary narrative. And by that, I'm saying that to know ourselves and to articulate our own modernity, we must also be aware of the other person's personal narrative, right? So my research looks at Paul Gilroy's notion of cultural exchange in the Black Atlantic and illustrates the presence of an other Black experience in the West, while recognizing the historical connection and contiguity of narratives within a universalized Black experience. It is therefore in an attempt to reconcile with difference and distinction within the context of Blackness, in addition to womanhood, that I begin to tell my story both critically and creatively. Scholars Eleanor Oakes and Lisa Capps, they have an article called Narrating the Self, which posits that narratives interface self and society, constituting a crucial resource for socializing emotions, attitudes, and identities, developing interpersonal relationships, and constituting membership in a community. The inevitable and recurring performativity of personal narratives, like my songs, therefore, is ultimately the rearticulation of one's own identity as well as that of her extended community. In concurrence with Oakes and Capps, I believe that the personal narratives I share through songwriting and performance articulate the collective experience of my entire transnational African girl community, identifying with what I attempt to redress. My work as a singer-songwriter can thus be said to offer what Oakes and Capps refer to as an opportunity to impose order on otherwise disconnected events and to create continuity between past, present, and imagined worlds. Through the performance of my songs as a jazz vocalist, I am constantly I'm trying to re-articulate a personal narrative of socialization, identity construction, and cultural legacy. I'm particularly interested in illustrating the linguistic, sonic, and physical embodiment of such findings in my work as an artist. Elizabeth Gross tells us that the establishment of a speaking body and the capacity to follow the norms of narrative structure owes an unspeakable debt to the body. In other words, subjectivity can only be obtained through a presupposed embodiment. With this understanding, I believe that I must first reconcile with the narrative of my body as a Black African female vocalist before understanding or articulating my subjectivity in the new African diaspora. And by new African diaspora, I'm talking about those who were born in Africa and or raised in Europe or in the West after the first successful independence movement of Africa in 1957 in Ghana. Using cross-disciplinary methods of anthropology, performance studies, and ethnomusicology, my research seeks to autoethnographically locate the corporal and musical inscription of my transnational female experience while illustrating how the performativity of my shared personal narratives are an example of my entire community's authentic hybridity, the thoroughly lived and essentially embodied experience of multiple places. In doing so, I'm also positing that through both sonic and visual engagement, my community participates in a relentless and necessary process of what is called Deleuzian reterritorialization, and a move towards something I call fixed placelessness, an imagined space that celebrates and validates an authentically hybrid collective experience. Explicitly placed in the context of post-colonialism, by reterritorialization I'm referring to the work of Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari and the minoritarian processes of reterritorialization, which is basically like returning home. When you talk about reterritorialization, you're talking about returning to a homeland. Through the sheer presence of minoritarian narrative, my work is placed in a relentless and celebratory process of what Deleuze and Guattari call becoming minor. Deleuze and Guattari encourage this process in creative work and suggest that it is essentially a constant rehabilitation of dispositionality, that it is not so much about the end, but about the process or about the becoming. It is in this discussion that they introduce the notion of reterritorialization in the post-colonial experience and illustrate how one may physically leave from their ancestral land or place of belonging. In my case, we left Rwanda and Uganda and actually set up our lives and and I'm here working in the States and have a very strong identity as an American woman as well. So it's about leaving. We can physically leave that ancestral land or place of belonging, but live in a constant process of reclamation of that land and of that heritage through writing and through minoritarian narrative or through singing, like in my case, in my language, and in many languages. It is my hope that this research lends itself not only to a larger discourse amidst the burgeoning nexus of post-colonial identity politics, but truly reconciles with the binary narratives of Blackness that Gilroy's work has begun to bring forth. It is only then, with a keen understanding of our relentless processes of always returning and always becoming, that there will be an authentically hybrid space of belonging for future transnational African girl children. And with that, I'm actually going to just show this film so you have an idea of this community that I'm speaking of and speaking on behalf of and saying that exists. I'm assuming there are a few of you in the audience, or quite a bit of you, some of you who have African parents or you're first generation American, and hopefully both male and female, you can relate to some of the stories of these women and their perception of themselves and their perception of my work and their stories.
Other than your original birth country or homeland, and you come with different values than the average American or Black American child, because you come with your African values, and that incorporating your African values into just your everyday life as a Black girl living in America is more for you because you are not only just a Black girl living in America, you are a Black African girl living in America, and you can't really you can't become so consumed with your American culture that you forget your African culture. You can't be so consumed with your African culture that you forget your American culture. So it's such this crazy kind of juggling act that you have to do. Or at least it's been this juggling act that I've had to do as a transnational child. Having two strong Ghanaian parents who were very strict about the language being spoken at home, who were very strict about the culture and the food we ate, and then still being able to go outside and play double dutch. We my friends is something I had to judge because it was like, you know, but I couldn't explain to my mother who a Jehovah's Witness was. And I couldn't explain to my friends what my faith was because that's what the girls in college, they don't play with it.
I definitely believe that that's